So one of the requirements of being from Montreal is on every podcast, I have to mention Leonard Cohen at least once.
I was hoping you were to bring this line in. Yes.
And he has this song, which is a famous song. It's the chorus of his song Anthem, where he says, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And that was in the back of my mind when I started playing with this word crack, that there's a crack in everything, in every system, and that's where you can make change. That's where there's possibility. But for the recording, let me just give you something you can use at the very end if you want, which I'll sing the chorus.
Wow, bonus. Okay, you're the first guest who's ever graced us with their singing talents, so let's hit it. Welcome to The Lift, the show about leadership, growth, and getting what we want. I'm your host, Ben Brooks. For over a decade, I've worked with CEOs, their executive teams, HR departments, and entrepreneurs to identify what drives their success and what holds them back. And now I'm excited to share those insights with you. On The Lift, we pull up to see the bigger picture from accomplished leaders who know how to get things done in a rapidly changing world. We've got all of that and a lot more coming up next on The Lift. What do you do when you need to work with people you genuinely can't stand? Not someone who just rubs you the wrong way in a meeting. I mean people who are on the opposite sides of a civil war. Today's guest has spent 35 years finding the answer in some of the most complex conflicts in modern history. Adam Kahane is the co-founder of Reos Partners. Throughout his career, he's facilitated processes in more than 50 countries. In fact, he helped South Africa navigate its transition away from apartheid and worked on Colombia's peace process. The Nobel Prize winner who ended that civil war said that Adam's work was, quote, one of the most significant events in the country's search for peace, end quote. Wow. He was also awarded the Order of Canada for his work on building peaceful programs around the world. He's brought together generals and guerrillas, politicians and activists, and enemies at every turn. And he has a new book called Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. The central idea of the book is radical engagement, not blowing things up, not waiting for perfect conditions, and actually getting into contact with the people we'd rather avoid. He also has a concept that I haven't been able to shake, the cracks. Every system has them, and that's exactly where change gets in. On past episodes of The Lift, we've discussed how to navigate conflict or get people across the table to come to a consensus. But today we're really asking, what does it take to change a system from the inside? Let's get into it. Adam Kahane, welcome to The Lift.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, I wanted to start us with where you were being a physicist at Shell Energy, and you're building scenario models. And then apparently you got a call in about 1991 to head to South Africa. What happened?
I was in the part of Shell in London that made scenarios for what could happen in the world, part of Shell's strategic planning process. And there was a group of academics and activists associated with the opposition in South Africa that wanted to use that methodology to think about how to make the transition from apartheid to democracy. And they wanted somebody to provide methodological advice. I was dispatched and basically never came back.
Did you ever think when you were in school and studying at McGill and elsewhere that you'd be using these skills around transforming an entire country?
No, I wasn't very involved politically. I didn't know much about South Africa. I had never heard of the kind of work that I ended up doing, which is bringing people together from across the system, in this case, from across the South African society, black and white, men and women, opposition and establishment, politicians, business people, trade unionists, community leaders, to think together about what can we do about our situation. So I found myself plunged into it, and I loved it.
What were some of the big things you learned in that experience working with such a wide coalition of maybe divergent views and histories and energies?
The methodology we used was exactly the same as we'd used in Shell. I didn't know anything different. So mechanically, the steps to build scenarios were unchanged, but the energy was completely different. And I realized eventually that the difference was fundamental but simple. At Shell, we were building scenarios to figure out how to adapt to whatever happened in the world, but these South Africans were building scenarios because they wanted to influence what happened in the world, and particularly to influence what would happen in South Africa, and they did. Once you've worked with people like that, you never want to go back. So I think that the big thing I learned is what a wonderful experience it is to be with people who are not just trying to get along within a system as it is, but want to make it better.
I think the idea of sort of working within the system versus working on the system or to change the system is a very different paradigm. And it is sort of the default that people kind of adapt to the system that they are in. What have you seen as sort of a pattern of people that are, wanting to kind of just not work in the system, but work on the system?
No, I think you're raising the most fundamental question of all. And it's usually both. It's usually that, there's things we have to live with, we can't change. And there's things we don't want to live with and we can change. In this respect, that famous serenity prayer
Just thinking that, yeah.
is exactly on target about the serenity to live with things you cannot change and the courage to change the things you can. I mean, it's raining today in Montreal and there's nothing I can do about it. I have to adapt to it. If I want to go out, I have to bring an umbrella or a raincoat. So the idea that we can change everything is nonsense. But the idea that we have to live with everything exactly as it is also, I don't know if it's nonsense, but there's things we can influence. And that's what my work's been about ever since.
Over the next 5 years, you were in some pretty intractable conflicts and disagreements, generals, guerrillas, civil war, genocide aftermath, et cetera. What did you notice? Because I got to imagine there's some patterns around the construct.
So I think there's a couple of them. One you've touched on, which is that most of the systems we deal with are made by people and can be changed by people, although in many cases they're made by people over long periods, and changing them also requires long periods. But the other thing, which is the real takeaway from South Africa and where I've been focusing on, it is possible to work together across differences, including with people we don't agree with or like or trust, even with people who we think of as our enemies. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, it's not guaranteed. It may or may not be fun, but it can be done. I wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree with or Like or Trust. And when I prepared the second edition of the book, I decided to take more seriously the word in the title, enemy. But the problem I'm finding is that people use the word enemy very broadly and thinly, not only with people who are trying to seriously harm or injure them, but people they disagree with or don't like or who rub them the wrong way or who look at them funny on the street. This dividing of the world into the people we can work with, our friends, and the people we can never work with, our enemies, is getting to be a real problem. Actually, much of the world is this gray area, neither friends nor enemies, people we might need to work with, and how can we do that?
There is something intoxicating, right, about having a quote-unquote enemy, even if they're not the actual threat. I mean, isn't something get kicked up in people with this idea that's like part of our survival and our evolution?
I think many of us, certainly me, tend to personalize. I do that all the time. I do that 5 times a day. But I think often it's a lazy response. That it's not about me. I'm doing everything right. I'm perfect. I'm a good guy. I'm doing my best, but it's them. And well, sometimes it's them, but it's not always them. And the tendency to always say it's them leaves us frustrated and angry and frightened more of the time than is sensible.
There's an immediate payoff to the sort of blame, right? Psychologists have talked about it's the discharge of anger or shame. We can put those feelings away on something else or someone else, and we don't have to be responsible because it's their fault.
Exactly.
But then the problem I find is then you're stuck because if it's just them, what do? You're hosed.
That's so true. And there's an exercise I've done often, and it's very powerful. It has to do with writing down a description of a situation in 2 different ways. The first way is to write down what's going on and what other people are doing to make it the way it is and what they need to do differently for the situation to change. You take a couple of minutes and you just write down everything you're thinking.
Sure.
Then you turn the page and you describe the same situation, but now you describe it in terms of what you're doing that's contributing to things being the way they are and what you would need to do differently for the situation to change. And I've done this many times with people, and I ask them to compare the two essays, and what do you notice? And they typically have two responses. The first response is they feel more guilty. Oh, I'm part of this. I didn't realize. I'm embarrassed. I see it's partly my fault. But the second is they feel agency. Okay, well, if I'm part of this, then I can do something about it right away, rather than just being upset and frustrated and angry or trying to force other people to do something different than they're doing. And in my experience, that doesn't work very much. I've got 4 kids and 10 grandkids and lots of colleagues and clients. And my success in getting people to do something they don't want to do is around 5%. So it's not very productive.
I've said the upside of taking responsibility is feeling powerful. And that's the agent's like, what could we do? Because the stuckness, when people feel dominated or backed into a corner or hopeless, they often turn to extreme means, or their thinking becomes pretty dire. But when you kind of get into expanding that locus of control, people start to realize there may be something we can do, which isn't a complete solve to eradicate a thing, but to move it forward.
That's very much what I found so remarkable and so inspiring. But there's a flip side of it, I think, which is recognizing the power of others, which isn't being cowed by it, but recognizing, the way I've been putting it these days, is everybody's trying to do something. Everybody's got something they're trying to do. You might not understand it. You might like it. It might frighten you. You might wish they were doing something different. But the place to start is to recognize everybody's got this thing they're trying to do, every individual, every team, every organization, every nation. And to start with a certain acknowledgement and recognition and respect for that, rather than, as many of us do, starting with, here's what I don't like about you and what you're doing. I mean, you may not like them and what they're doing. In extreme cases, it may be harming you and you really want them to stop. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to agree with it or like it or go along with it. But I am saying you have to start by trying to understand, why are they doing what they're doing? And that's the flip side. If I'm acknowledging my power, then I have to acknowledge the power, what Paul Tillich calls the drive of everything living to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity. That's the definition of power that I'm using. And to realize everybody's just trying to do their thing, and we have to work out how to maneuver through that, usually by experimenting a way forward. But it doesn't start by saying, you should just be different. Here's what we all ought to do. It's a terrible way to start.
So is it even possible to sit down if I haven't worked through those things? Because I mean, the people that you've worked with and the examples that you've talked, these are not like people figuring out, where the property line is in a homeowners association. We're talking about people that have maybe tried to kill each other or have killed each other or other major things. And so there's so much emotion there. How can you even talk or listen with that?
In a way, it's easier when the stakes are higher. I can be having a low-level feud about property lines with my neighbor and go on with my life and get dug into my position and whatever. But the gift for me of working in these high-stakes contexts in South Africa, in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Israel, all over the world, is that people understand this really matters. And I think it's the same phenomena in all of these contexts, but that they're easier to see in the extraordinary context. And that's why I do the work and I write about it, because I think it's useful even for people who are not doing the same work as I am.
And I want to talk about your new book, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. And when I thought about change, every customer that our company deals with and every private client CEO and anyone I work with, is dealing with a lot of change right now. And I don't know if we're ever not dealing with change, but I think it seems more pronounced with macro things around geopolitics and trade and, affordability and war and political division and artificial intelligence, et cetera. And I think our typical way of sort of managing change is, we got to do one-way communications, or we got to train people, or we got to make a strategy. But you purport kind of taking a very different approach to even conceptually how you think about change. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think it goes back to the very first thing you mentioned when we started this conversation, which is we're all embedded in systems.
Yes.
Family systems, political systems, economic systems, sectoral systems, organizational systems, ecological systems. The idea that I'm just doing my thing and it doesn't really matter what's going on around me is not correct.
Although I think we do idolize that or fetishize that in kind of Western society, this rugged individualism, without acknowledging the context.
Exactly. It's the other half of the story. We were talking a little while ago about agency and what I can do and being aware of my impact on things. So that's half the story. But the other half of the story is other people, other organizations are around me and constrain what I can do. I may want to walk straight ahead of me, but there's a wall straight ahead of me. It's a constraint on what I can do. We're part of larger systems. And now taking the other perspective, we can say, okay, that's just the way things are. There's nothing I can do about it. Let me live as well as I can within things as they are. That's fine. And for many things, that's very sensible. And the idea that we can change everything just with our willpower and our strength and our power and our intelligence is silly. So the question I'm asking is, when you are trying to change a larger system, how do you do that? You asked me how I came to write this book. I was talking to one of the people who had been involved 35 years ago in the South African exercise I was involved in, a man named Trevor Manuel, who at the time was the head of economics of the African National Congress and went into Mandela's cabinet and became the Minister of Finance and held that position for decades, a very important player in democratic South Africa. And I was talking to him about what he had done during apartheid and during the transition and once he was in government. And I realized that the way I was thinking about changing systems didn't fit with his experience. And it was actually a very frustrating interview. I'm not a very experienced interviewer, not like you, but I kept interrupting him and saying, don't you mean this and don't you mean that? It was a terrible interview. It was a live 30-minute interview.
You don't have the pleasure of good editors when you're live. Yes.
No, I didn't. And when I hang up, my colleagues and my wife call me and say, it's a terrible interview. Don't quit your day job. You absolutely blew it. I was very embarrassed. I went over the transcript over and over, and I realized he was really looking at this completely differently. And what he was focusing on was this very basic thing. He said at one point, what we would do at that time is I would be in the morning in a poor community, and then I would be with activist students in the afternoon, and I would go see the business community, and then at night we'd be in a political party meeting. And I realized that what he was saying to me was so straightforward, so simple, is we did it through engaging with others over and over to try to figure out what were they trying to do, what was the way forward, how could we find a way through all of this. And then later, when he described how he did economic policy, now as the Minister of Finance, he had a similar story. So this became the key idea in the book, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems, and I call it radical engagement. Engagement means getting into encounter with. It's also the same engaging in battle. So it's this active process of working with people. And then I use the word radical, not to mean extreme, but radical as in radish, the root, the fundamental. So I talk about radical engagement, connecting with others under the surface about what really matters.
There's a certain degree of self-awareness and self-regulation someone has to have to sit down and not flip the table over or immediately cut someone off or scream. Like, I really don't like these people or what they stand for, or what they've done. And yet we still need to talk or engage. But we don't really teach executives or leadership models or managers to think about self-regulation or, self-awareness or kind of emotional processing. But that is a restraining force to people sitting down at that table and having that radical engagement.
Yes, absolutely. I never met Mr. Mandela, and I don't want to reify him. He was a human being with weaknesses as well as strengths. But what he was famous for was his self-regulation and the way he taught himself, including during 27 years in prison, to control himself and to approach people in a way that was going to be productive rather than unproductive. And yes, I think a lot of us in this sense are childish. I'm going to say what I want to say no matter what you think. I'm Canadian, and Canadians are famous for being polite. And when I was younger, I used to think this was a terrible thing. Why don't people say what they really think? But I think the capacity to deal with reality as it is and to try to change systems, but without being needlessly or fruitlessly antagonistic or rude in a way that might be fun for a minute, but doesn't help you make your way forward at all. So I think I've become more appreciative of politeness and civility and self-regulation as an ingredient, not in leaving things the way they are, but in being able to actually change things without violence.
I did want to bring in, this idea of the cracks. Yeah. I want you to describe what there is, but I just know there is such a tendency in the corporate world. Everything's great. Everything's fine. We don't want to raise problems. We want to get along. But the cracks, these fissures that you've created this distinction, I just love the quote you have around there, which I'll have you share. But for me, it's antithetical to the typical nothing to see here behavior of a lot of management.
This is a metaphor that I started to play with, this word crack. And it's important, and I think it's the image or the word in the book which has resonated with the most people. And it's just saying that when you're faced with a system, it looks like this big thing that the only way to change it would be to dynamite it. I mean, sure, you can dynamite things if you want, but often that's very difficult. And as I said, in the South African context, you end up destroying that which you're trying to gain or to capture. So there's another way to look at it, which is that these systems are always shifting. There's cracks. They may be breakthroughs. They may be breakdowns. But things are shifting and opening up opportunities. And you can make change by working with what's shifting. And the image, probably the best version of this metaphor is when you think about climbing a mountain climber doesn't climb a mountain. They climb the cracks in a mountain. Mm-hmm. And from far away, these cracks are usually invisible. You find the cracks, you find the places, the handholds and the footholds from up close. So that idea that if you're trying to transform a system, one very effective thing to do is see what's shifting, see where there's something working that you can amplify, where there's something not working that you can work with. Can you use the crack? Can you expand the crack? Can you go through the crack? So I use that image a lot, and I think it's really helpful because it provides an alternative to, I just have to blow the whole thing up.
Yep.
Now, there is, of course, another reference, which I didn't put in the book, because when you publish a book in the United States for copyright reasons, you can't ever quote a song.
Okay.
Not at all. Not even one sentence of a song. But I'm from Montreal, and so one of the requirements of being from Montreal is on every podcast, I have to mention Leonard Cohen at least once. I was hoping you were to bring this line in. Yes. And he has this song, which I didn't put in the book for that reason, a famous song. It's the chorus of his song Anthem, where he says, "There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." And that was in the back of my mind when I started playing with this word crack, that there's a crack in everything, in every system, and that's where you can make change. That's where there's possibility. But when I looked at the song, I found that the sentence before that is even more useful, I think. He says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I read an interview of Cohen where he talked about that first line and this idea that all of us have bells that we can ring. In other words, something that is immediately within our grasp. They may be obvious. They may be hidden from us. We may have to search for them. But the requirement for being able to ring the bell that we can ring is to forget our perfect offering. Forget this idea that our idea has to be perfect, or our timing has to be perfect, or our delivery has to be perfect, or our partners have to be perfect, or that we have to be perfect. It's the willingness to, say, let me try this and see where we can get to from here. So this is actually the perfect summary of what I've been trying to say in the book. But for the recording, let me just give you something you can use at the very end if you want, which I'll sing the chorus.
Wow, bonus. Okay, you're the first guest who's ever graced us with their singing talents, so let's hit it.
So the way it goes is, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. So use that if you want.
Adam, one way we like to wrap up part of our conversation before our final segment is to simply ask, what's sticky? We've been working on this for 35 years, but what are you going to walk away with and think about or be curious about after our conversation?
What I take away or am reminded of is the starting point is what's going on here. So you could say, what's the problem or what's the opportunity, but what's the reality right now? Let's start with that and see what we want to do about it. And part of starting with that is starting with I and others doing what we're trying to do and being as we are. I may need to change what I'm doing. You may need to change what you're doing. I may need to try to get you to change what you're doing. All of this is possible. But the starting point is, where are we now? What's going on?
Adam, what's sticky for me as we're talking is just so many executives I know, lose sleep at night around groups not getting along in their organization or their organization with other, could be competitors or industry things, regulators, teams, et cetera, supply chain partners. And this idea of getting along, not meaning just, being polite and not saying the thing, but actually finding a way to work together. I just feel like it's a more in vogue and needed capability in our leaders than in my lifetime.
Well, I'd put it another way, which is that there are always differences of opinion, differences of perspective, differences of history, differences of interests. That's always there 100% of the time. And ignoring it is a really bad idea. It doesn't make it go away. It just sweeps it under the carpet. It's the reality of the situation. And getting upset about reality is a really bad idea.
The last bit I like to ask is, if I were to pay you $10,000 for your best advice, what would be that kind of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I have actually only one piece of advice I always give, which is there may be somebody that you really are having a big disagreement with or a fight with, or you're upset about, or you wish they were different, or you wish they would do something different. That's fine. But why don't you just take half an hour and try to see it from their perspective? And the most straightforward way to do that is to find a way to talk with them and simply ask them, can you explain to me how this looks from your perspective? And resist the temptation during that 30 minutes to tell them, no, they're all wrong, and here's the real thing, and here's what you want, and here's what they ought to do, and here's why they should be a better person. You can go back to doing that at minute 31. But just take the time to try to see it from their perspective. You may, at the end of that 30 minutes, think the same thing that you thought it before, which is they're wrong and they should change and you need to figure out a way to force them to change. I'm not saying you'll agree with them, but you may find, oh, this is why they keep going on about that thing. This is the thing that's important to them. Oh, I hadn't quite gotten that. Now that I get it from their perspective, I see that there's an option that I didn't realize we had that we could try out.
A pro tip for folks out there, if you struggle to just listen, you're having a reaction, one way to manage not saying something is to take notes. You got to give yourself something to do to channel some of that, or repeat back to them what they're saying rather than say something else, because you really want to be present and learn, and just sit with it. Listening to them does not make them right, and it does not make you wrong. So I think, Adam, that's a killer advice, just to radically engage with your two big ears.
Very good.
Well, Adam Kahane, thank you for joining the show, and thank you for all your work in the world to bring people together. We need more of that. And to the leaders out there listening, hear their point of view.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, everyone, let's turn today's episode into action. Adam has spent decades helping people on opposite sides of conflict find a way forward. Now, most of us aren't navigating civil wars or peace negotiations, but the dynamics aren't as different as you'd think. Here are some key takeaways on navigating conflict and transforming systems that are stuck. First, try the 2 essay exercise. Take a conflicting or frustrating situation that you're stuck in, write 2 short paragraphs. The first, what's going on and what are other people doing to cause it? And the second, what you're doing to contribute and what you need to change. And then compare them. The first gives you someone to blame, and the second shows you where you can take action. Next, take 30 minutes to see it from their side. Think of someone you're in conflict with or deeply disagree with, and find a way to sit down with them and ask them one question. Can you explain how this looks from your perspective? You don't have to agree with them, but you might gain some insights into a way to move forward. And finally, look for those cracks, because in the wise words of Leonard Cohen, that's how the light gets in. When a system or situation feels immovable, ask yourself, what's already shifting? Where's a small opening I can move through? Remember, you don't climb a mountain, you climb the cracks in it. Thanks for joining me this week on The Lift. For more info on what you heard in today's episode, visit our show notes. You can find out more about the show at theliftpod.com. If listening to The Lift today was a good use of your time, please share it with a colleague, a friend, I don't know, your ex, your mother, anyone. Don't let good advice die with you. And for those of you who like to earn a little bit of extra credit, leave a comment on Spotify. We'd love to hear from you. The Lift is produced and edited by the team at Edit Audio. This episode was produced by Victoria Marin and edited by Ali Sirwa. Our production manager is Kathleen Speckert. Our executive producer is Steph Colburn. A special thanks to Corey Rich and Beth Gatzik. Woo! The crowd goes wild. Woo!